Welcome to the Refold Roundtable Podcast, where we talk about the things you want us to talk about. And this week we are talking about all things reading. George, you want to take it away?
Yeah, so I guess, again, the audience usually chooses these topics. So let's see here. Let's see. Who do we want to start with? Darius, why don't you tell us your relationship with reading? If I recall, you were like a non-reader, like strict listening for like 6 years.
Yeah. So for those who don't know me, I've been studying for like 13 years now overall. And when I started learning, first of all, I didn't decide to start learning Japanese. It's more like I liked anime, and I was watching anime, and I'm just naturally like, I don't know, like a puzzle solver. Like I like to figure out how things work. So if I'm listening to all this like Japanese with English subtitles, I will start to try and just figure out how it works naturally. And that was just my natural path into learning Japanese. So there was no point where I just decided I want to do it. So there was no point where I made like a huge plan of like the optimal way to learn or like anything like that. I just like listened to anime. And that's what I did for like a while, like a couple of years. I was mostly just listening to anime. Like at some point I checked out like the Tai Kim guide online, to learn some grammar. And I, after that, some point got like more interested in grammar and started reading like linguistics papers in English, of course, about Japanese, just because I'm naturally like inclined to that like rule sort of breakdown of things because I'm into computer science and math and all that. So those were like the things I was doing, and reading was basically no part of this. Like reading would involve learning kanji and like cramming kanji, and for my goals, which was like literally just to have a good time doing what I was already doing, reading was like not part of things, and I just kept on doing that for basically 6 years. At some point I moved to Boston. Previously I was in Connecticut, where there were like no Japanese people or very few Japanese people. But when I moved to Boston, there were some Japanese people. And at that point I was already able to have like basic conversations due to just having watched so much anime and like thought about the grammar and stuff. So I started having conversations, I started making friends, and I got to like a level of conversational fluency, all without any reading, pretty much. So yeah, that's my story.
All right. And if I had to ask you if you're team reading or team listening, what would you say?
I have to say I'm team. I don't like dichotomies because they both have, benefits. The obvious breakdown is that, listening will help you with like your like flow. And in my opinion, it helps a little bit more with bringing things into your active vocabulary when you're speaking. But then reading on the other side helps with things like building your passive vocab like massively.
You have to choose.
Yeah,
you have to choose.
I have to choose. Okay.
There's no fence sitting. This is a battle, and you have to pick your side.
Okay. In that case, I would say I'm probably on the not reading side, or at least on the do what's fun for you. So if you don't like reading, then I would be on the don't read side.
Wow. Shots fired, everyone. Yeah. He is team not reading. Everyone heard it here. Cool.
All right. And how about you, Bree? Are you team reading or not? What's your relationship with reading?
I'm here to fight. Okay. I am team reading 100%, mostly because that's what sparks joy and that's what I like doing, and I'm also in the mindset of do what you like. And for me that's reading. I'm obviously not fluent yet as far as speaking is concerned, and I want to say over half of my immersion has been reading, and I've read since very early on, but it's Spanish. So it was a lot easier to jump into reading Spanish than a language like Chinese or Japanese, where you actually have to like study to start. But I remember I started relatively early on, I think about 3 months in. The first 3 months I was trying to read subtitles along with it, and then I jumped into webtoons and then books. But I want to say, like, for me, my comprehension really took off when I started reading a lot. So, team reading. Woohoo.
Okay, cool. And how about you, Shiki? So, go ahead and tell us, like, what language you're learning. Quick rundown. And are you team reading or listening? What's your relationship with reading?
So, I'm learning Japanese, and basically, I want to follow in Darius's footsteps.
Ooh.
I'm team listening, and so as a kid, I did a lot of reading in English, reading books, but then I was introduced to this thing called video games, and that went out the window because video games are so much more entertaining than books, and I'm not afraid to say it. I'll say it.
Wow. Wow. I'm gonna fight you. No, just kidding.
And I don't know. I just enjoy watching stuff. I enjoy consuming content in a audio-visual format because it's just so much more stimulating to me overall. And also, as far as Japanese and like languages in general, it's like I prioritize being able to communicate and speak well and be conversational rather than just having a massive vocab for no reason.
Wow.
So,
wow.
I'm just enjoying doing what I'm doing, like watching stuff. And I'll get to reading eventually. It's just, I'm just living my best life, enjoying my, flashy colors, my nice pew pew sounds. And
Anime is
yeah.
great about that. Lots of bright colors, lots of pew pew sounds.
Pew,
Cool.
pew, pew.
So, Soup, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your relationship with reading?
Yeah, my alias, I guess, is Soup in this server. In Russian, that means, well, soup. My name in English looks like soup in Russian, so yeah, that's the context. Anyways, I started off, or I'm learning Japanese. I started off watching basically anime without subs for a year. This was to work on my listening ability before I got really deep into reading, because I knew from the beginning I was gonna read a lot eventually, and so I wanted my accent to not be, bad by the time I got into it. So after a year, I started reading a lot, novels mainly, for about 2 years, and then yeah, it brings me to today, where I'm actually going back to working on speaking, because my writing is quite good, as you can imagine, from reading for 2 years. But my speaking is lagging behind quite a bit. So
how much have you read, Soup?
How do you want me to quantify that? Like in books read?
You
Do you have
quantify in
words?
books or words, maybe. I imagine. So in my mind, most books are about 50,000 words, but that is not always true. It's just a good rule of thumb for me personally. So it's totally up to you.
Yeah, so in my experience, most Japanese books I've read have been around 100,000 characters. Some have been 170, some 250. But they're mostly like between 90 and 120, I guess. But I've read 117 novels, I think.
Wow.
So if you want to do the math, that adds up to quite a lot of characters.
Also goals.
Right. Cool. And then I'll give a brief introduction. So hi, I'm Gord. And I've in the past learned a couple of different languages. Right now I am dabbling in Japanese to kind of go along with Refold and getting to test out all the cool new stuff that we're building behind the scenes. But personally, I've not done a lot of reading in Japanese, obviously 20 days into it. With Spanish and with Filipino, I have read a whole bunch. I'm definitely team reading. And I have different reasons for it. Spanish content and Filipino content are not usually like my jam when they're audiovisual. The production values are a little bit lower. I'm not the target audience, right? For like soap operas. So I find that I am able to better enjoy the content when it's literary, when it's written. And my relationship with reading is I'm a reader in English. I like to read. I read a lot, and I will keep reading. And yeah, I'm team reading all the way.
Yeah. Team reading. Let's go.
So how did you guys get into reading? Like, I imagine it's going to be different, because like with Spanish, I was able to jump right in pretty much and start reading light novels. I got to 2C in Spanish, very quickly, like within a month or two of just binging light novels. But with Japanese, I imagine it's a little bit harder.
I guess I can go first here. So I had already been speaking for a couple years and learning overall for 6 years when I started reading. And the motivation was actually just like sort of a type of frustration in the sense that why can I speak and I'm like illiterate? Like it's not the greatest feeling, right? So I was like, I kind of just want to fix that. So my method was actually not something I really recommend. It does work in the sense that I just grabbed a paper book, and at the time, the way to look up kanji was like using this thing called skip lookups, which is like you count the number of strokes and like the shape of the kanji and use that to look up the kanji. And it was the biggest waste of time of like the most inefficient method you could think of to do it. But for some reason, I just grabbed a book and started doing that. I think it took me like an hour or two to like read a single page when I started, even though I was already like, semi-fluent. I was just looking up kanji for like an hour or two every day. Like getting through a single page. It was not great. So let me put my vote in for this is my non-recommendation of how to do it. But I guess that's what I did. And I just kept on doing that for like a couple months, at which point I became a little faster to the point where I was getting through like 10 pages an hour or something. And then I just kept on going. And after like a couple of years, I was fine.
After a couple of years of doing that. So
after a couple of
years. Did you do, because like, I can't even imagine because I'm learning Spanish and it's so different because from the very beginning, it was like, oh, okay, these vowels make a different sound, and there's like a r sound. Okay, whatever, boom, got it. But with Japanese, like, like there's like kanji and like all this other stuff. So did you do any conscious study, like to learn how to read? Like, how does that look when you are already fluent, but you can't read? So like, you said you looked everything up, but did you do anything like with or anything to try to do drills, or did you just like brute force through it?
Yeah, in my case, I brute forced it. Wow. I didn't do any Anki, and I didn't do any kanji like practice. I just looked stuff up until I remembered it. And in some sense, it worked for my personality because like I did very much dislike studying, like something that feels like studying. But I do like challenges, and like trying to make it through a book or something is a challenge, and it doesn't feel as much like studying to me, so it sort of worked out for me. And that said, like it's clearly less efficient. Like this is not the efficient way to learn, and like I said, like it took me a couple years and I wasn't spending that much time a day. I was spending like maybe an hour a day on average.
It's still a commitment though.
An hour a day is actually a lot. I've got to say, like
that's a lot.
For people who are working 40 plus hours a week with a wife and a child. And that's like a hefty commitment, I would say. To put it into perspective, we in the immersion community, we're used to like 2 hours a day being a light day. But for a lot of like normies, right, that's a pretty hefty amount of time, I think, an hour a day.
Yeah.
But it definitely does not sound pleasant. The skip sort of input method for like finding characters sounds awful. I'm glad that we have like pop-up dictionaries and OCR in 2022.
Do you remember what your first book was?
That
you finished all the way through.
Yeah, Shitamachi Rocket by Keido Jun.
What's that in English for us normies who don't know Japanese?
Like Downtown Rocket, I guess, if you translated it. Yeah.
Oh wow. And what kind of book was it?
It's like a business novel. So like it takes place. It's like the employees of a business like trying to like accomplish something and hitting all sorts of like roadblocks. So business fiction sort of thing.
Okay, so fiction. Okay, cool. Wow. Yeah. Okay, Sin. So you have the opposite experience, I think, than Darius, where he waited forever, and then. Sin, you're an avid reader. Do you remember the first book that you read, Sin, and about how far into Japanese were you when you started reading?
The first book was ReZero, which is probably not that surprising to some of you.
Gasp.
And then I didn't read anything until I was a year in. I just went straight into novels. But from what it sounds like, I basically did the same thing Darius did in terms of learning how to read. So
Really?
Really? That's
You
surprising.
both did the same thing. I'm really surprised at that. I was like thinking it was a totally different experience. So you just brute forced it too? You just did lookups and didn't do Anki or anything? You just like went through it?
I did do some Anki, but it was like
Yeah.
barely any. So, but yeah, it was.
Wait, man,
like,
you
most
must have
annoying part-
you must have at least have been doing like hover dictionary lookups or something electronic, right? You weren't doing paper, were you?
No, I didn't do paper for a while. So yeah, I was
Okay.
using
Thank God.
Hover Dictionary.
That is the right way to do it, kids. I do not recommend starting with paper.
But
Yeah, that sounds
the
like
most
suffering.
annoying. Yeah, like the most annoying part for me was like
Yeah.
knowing a bunch of words, right, from just listening a lot,
Mhm.
but then not knowing what it is I'm like looking at until I like look it up and it's like, oh, it's that word. I know that word. I just don't know the reading, and it took like doing that a million times to actually make everything stick. So
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. I started reading, I remember my first book. It was Percy Jackson because I had read it before and I tried reading it right away and I immediately noped out. That was probably about a month into learning Spanish. I was like, yeah, I can read a book. And then I opened it and then I had to look up literally every single word, which made me immediately quit and feel terrible about my life choices up until that moment. And I backtracked and decided to watch Pokemon with subs and look up every single word in Spanish because I like dubs. I'm a dirty dub listener. And then from there, I went back to Percy Jackson and I looked up everything, but I was using Link, which made reading palatable. And kind of like you said earlier, Darius, like it was a challenge. I wasn't necessarily enjoying it, but I wanted to get through it. And then after I got through the first book, reading was a lot more enjoyable from that point on. And I just like reading in general anyway. But I was definitely doing Anki when I was reading. And everything I looked up, I highlighted in Link, and then I exported it, and then I added it to my Anki deck, which made the second half of the book and the second book and the third book in the series a lot easier because the authors, tend to use the same language. But that's my experience.
So that sounds like a very like modern way of doing it. Like
I'm a modern person.
With Anki, you've got Link with the pop-up dictionary coming in.
I'm a refolder.
So
it
sounds like,
man.
Yeah, it sounds nice. So have you graduated to paper books, or are you still team ebook?
So here's the thing. I like paper books. There are some paper books that I read, and I'll sit with my dictionary on my phone. The problem is that paper books don't glow, and I do a lot of my reading at night next to my child. So, like when she's asleep. And so it's kind of hard to bring in a big light, and it's a lot of drama. It's just a lot easier to read on my phone or on my Kindle now. But in the beginning, I wouldn't have touched a paper book. There was just too much resistance where it would have just taken way too much time, and I would have never finished a page or a sentence. The ability to read on a tablet, specifically, like not even a Kindle in the beginning, but a tablet that has a faster processor with immediate lookups, made it not, like, I wouldn't say it was easy, but like easier than what Darius was doing with a paper book, looking everything up in a paper dictionary, living the paper life.
No, I don't know if he was using a paper dictionary. I think he was using
Were you doing a paper dictionary?
An electronic dictionary, right?
Yeah, I was using an electronic dictionary.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Not quite
reading.
paper life.
Right, almost the paper life though.
Almost.
Because,
Like
you're
old
looking
school.
at you're looking at a glyph, and you need to figure out how to look that up.
Basically
And,
the paper life.
Yeah, basically. The paper life.
Okay, we're just going to call it the paper life. It was essentially the paper life.
Yeah, so
I would have not survived that.
For the non-weebs out there, obviously kanji present a unique problem, right, when it comes to indexing. So they very quickly adapted to electronic dictionaries. They're like little standalone devices that you would use to look things up. I'm not sure if they still use them, but they still teach it. I think actually it's like in my N5 deck that I'm doing, I've learned the word. I could recognize it if I saw it. So it's like definitely a cultural thing.
Yeah,
Cool.
I would say electronic dictionaries are still in use in Japan fairly
Do you
heavily.
find that you might have like retained more doing it that way because there's like a longer gap between looking up the word, you have the word in your mind, you're looking it up. It's a lot more mindful. That was something that I noticed with me at least recently, that when it's too easy, it's almost like I just skip the word when I'm reading it. And I've actually gone like backwards lately, where I'm reading and I'll physically write the word down. I'm not endorsing this. This is just what I do. It keeps me engaged, and I feel like I'm able to like make that word stick better in my brain before moving on. Like, do you feel like that could have helped you, or am I just reaching? It's okay if I'm just reaching.
So no, it's a very interesting point. I think there is that effect. However,
Yeah.
that effect pales in comparison to it being more fun and you doing more of it for like more
Yes.
hours.
Yeah.
So like,
There's
I
a
think
yeah.
yeah, as long as you're not making it so easy that you're not engaging with the reading at all. Like for
Mhm.
example, if you're like hover dictionarying over every single word and
Yeah.
like not even looking at the kanji or something, then it's going to be ineffective. But as long
Right.
as you're being mindful to some degree and like trying to think of it before you look it up, then I think just make it as easy as possible beyond that,
Right.
because you'll do more of it.
Yeah, definitely. That's my problem, is I tend to be very scatterbrained, hashtag ADHD life. So keeping myself engaged is something that I really struggle with. And it's almost worse now because reading is a lot easier for me, that I can just gloss over stuff. Because it's like one word, one or two words a page. I'm like, oh, I don't know what this is. Whatever. It's really easy to just gloss over it. But I'm
I
really
think
trying to be like in the moment.
this actually links to one of like the interesting dichotomies in language learning of
Oh.
like how much do you like do some focused deliberate practice on something slowly
Mhm.
versus doing like high volume and just like rapidly doing something. And like
Yeah.
this can be like this dichotomy exists in like any area of language learning.
Hmm.
And I think my opinion on it is that you generally want to be doing volume, but you
Hmm.
also need to do deliberate practice for like maybe 20% or something of what you
Right.
do, because otherwise like you will miss some details somewhere. And like those details like you can only get by doing the slow, like very deliberate practice, usually with like some sort of feedback from other people that
Right.
makes it even better. And like once you do that for the 20%, then you'll
Yeah.
like notice the things that you're missing. Like you
Hmm.
notice that you've been like misreading this type of kanji, or you thought two kanji were the same kanji forever, and like finally by slowing down and paying attention you
Yeah.
finally realize that. And then once you go back to your volume, you'll know to like pay an extra second of attention to that facet that you had been blowing over the entire time.
Yeah.
And it like feeds back into the volume reading strategy. So I think like a balance of the two is pretty good to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because, like you said, like if you don't like doing something, then you're not going to do it, or you're not going to absorb as much because you're not finding it
You
interesting or
know,
novel.
I'm tempted to say that reading is actually multiple activities. You've got your sort of
Oh.
intensive reading where you're looking everything up,
Hmm.
and then you've got like the taroku sort of extensive reading thing where you choose something really easy and you just go at
Hmm.
it. So like even though like yeah they're all reading, they're not. They're kind of like distinct
Yeah.
activities. Um, and
Yeah, I can see
yeah,
that.
I'm wondering how like if you guys know, do you know how much intensive reading you did versus extensive reading?
In the beginning, it was all intensive, or else I couldn't understand anything. So I was looking up literally everything. And when I was doing webtoons, I actually, because you can't select the text and look it up that way,
It
I was
forces
actually
you to
typing it into a
extensive.
dictionary.
Oh, you were
Yeah, it will.
typing it.
Not only that, I had to, because
I'm too lazy for that.
I was using my tablet. So the way I had it set up was I had my webtoon on one side, and then on the other side, I just had my dictionary up all the time, and I would type, like, I know this is bad, this is like a Refold sin, but I was typing in entire sentences and translating them in Spanish dict and trying to like deconstruct. But like, I think it's less dangerous. I mean, dangerous is not the right word, but it's less bad to do that in Spanish in the beginning, because I was just looking for anything to make it more comprehensible. And that is what I did for a very long time, and I almost feel like that act of like retyping everything out like got me ready to read my first book, but that is not proven, and I don't endorse that for anyone else to do. But that's about as analog as I got.
Okay, so you mentioned that when you first started reading, you were doing a lot of intensive and you were making flashcards with your learner. Darius, were you also making flashcards? Probably, I would imagine not, but I'm not sure.
No, I've never made flashcards at any point in my learning process, actually. Yeah.
Okay. No
He's not in the Anki gang.
Hey,
he is
more
not in the
power to
Anki
him.
gang.
I hate Anki. I despise it.
I left the Anki gang. Don't at me.
Yeah, so if my position has to be pro-reading or anti-reading, my actual position is anti-Anki, so it's neither of the two. Yeah, so I didn't do flashcards. That said, I was doing a lot of, like, I guess you would call it intensive reading, in the sense that I tend to be like a sort of perfectionist, or like I don't tolerate ambiguity, right? Like I
don't either. I hate ambiguity.
Yeah, I want to know what things mean. So
we push that on people. We push tolerate ambiguity, and I feel like your average advanced learner can tolerate it better than they think. The issue is that, like, with normal people coming in from outside of the immersion learning community, they see like a single word they don't know and they give up. So I feel like a lot of lookup addicts get really good. I don't know if you guys know Hulk. He got to like 5,000 known words in Cantonese in a year by just intensively for 30 minutes a day, every single thing he saw. So
Hulk has read like a billion words in Spanish too. Like I think he did the same thing in Spanish.
He probably did the same thing in Spanish, but that's less impressive than saying I got to 5,000 known words in a year in Cantonese.
That is very impressive. Hulk is extraordinarily impressive.
I intensive nothing.
You intensive nothing, not even anime with subs?
I just let it go. If I didn't understand, I guess I wasn't meant to understand. It'll just
you just let it flow over you? Like you just let the ambiguity flow over you?
Where are you grabbing like the words from? Are you not sentence mining?
I am. I guess I don't think I do enough lookups to consider anything I do intensive. I think it's just like varying levels of free flow.
But you're active. You're doing active immersion, where you're actively paying attention.
Yeah.
You're just not looking stuff up. Okay.
So I should probably mention that my first 6 months of immersion was 99% of the time using Japanese subtitles. So that was the extent of my reading. So I'm not completely illiterate in my defense, but I mostly just free flow stuff, and if a scene feels important to the plot, then I'll kind of be a little more look-up-y, but for the most part I just let it go. I'm totally zen with the ambiguity.
I wish I could be zen. That's great. It's great that you... So when you do start reading, do you have a plan or goals? When do you feel do you have a plan for when you want to start, or are you still feeling that out?
I'm just kind of going with the flow still.
That's good.
As far as isolated reading, without anime or whatever, I'll read manga, and I limit myself to a couple, one lookup per page. So that that forces me to be picky and strategic with it. I feel I'll look something up that feels important, and the rest of it, I just hope for the best.
I will say, for any of the Chinese listeners out there, Japanese manga has furigana. Even adult manga sometimes has it. And I noticed in my 2 years of failing miserably at Mandarin that even shonen, kids level manga don't have any sort of Ruby text in Chinese, and I'm terribly jealous of all the Japanese learners with their furigana. If you look at some of the later editions of JoJo in Japanese, it's every single kanji has Ruby text. So
wait, what is Ruby text? I don't understand that.
Like a character to help you read. Ruby is the language neutral term for it.
Oh.
Yeah, in the case of Japanese, there's some syllabary, hiragana, katakana characters on top of the kanji, which tell you how to sound it out. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, because I know. Okay, I'm gonna put. I know what furigana is.
Okay, yeah, furigana basically.
But I don't know. I didn't know that it was also called Ruby text.
So I'll give an answer to this, by the way, starting reading. So 20 days or so into Japanese, trying to be a real refolder for once. And
Proud of you.
Thank you. And I've already jumped onto the reading train. I read 200 pages of Tadoku level 0 yesterday.
What's
And
that?
just like, I don't know, it's like a graded reader series, and I like it so far. I like reading. I'm team
Yeah.
reading. It sounds like a lot, 200 pages. It's like 2 or 3 sentences per page with like a picture. So it's not that much, guys. It's like very little. But definitely, I started with the Tadako graded readers. They're a little bit easier than the Sakura graded readers that we've been pushing on people. And I've tried manga, but I don't have a tablet. I don't have a proper tablet, and it's really hard to read on your tiny little phone.
It is. It's very hard.
Yeah, so I've given up.
Webtoons are a lot easier on the phone.
I do like webtoons. I've found a few in Japanese, but they're all not my kind of webtoons. Comico.co.jp has some, but they're not like the fun ones.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, just jumping in, I'm team graded reader. You know, some people start off with translated stuff. I
Yes.
like graded readers. And
I do too.
yeah, the Tadako series so far has been I've only tried 2 series of graded readers for Japanese so far, but I like Tadako a lot.
I'm curious to know what team everyone is on as far as graded readers are concerned. So I know Gorg is team graded reader. I'm team graded reader. I didn't use them. I didn't know they really existed when I started. So I didn't read them, but I read a lot of really easy webtoons, and then I read graded readers probably when they were too easy for me, but I'm very pro graded reader. What do you all think? Sin, what do you think about graded readers?
I tried them once, just not for me personally. I remember when I first tried reading one,
Yeah.
like the language was simple, obviously, but it was
Right.
just boring. And at the time, I'd already waited a year to like get into reading, so I just said screw it. I just went straight into what I wanted to read, which was books. So, yeah.
Darius, if you could do it all over again, would you start with a graded reader, or would you just jump into a book?
Yeah, so I think about this often, right? Like if I were to do this all over again and not do any of my insanely ineffective methods.
You mean you wouldn't wait 6 years again to start reading?
Yeah, actually, I would not wait that much. So I think there's a lot of tools. I'll get to the graded reader thing, but I think there's a lot of tools that help here. So one thing that really does help is having your target language subtitles. This was not easily available when I was starting. Like you had English subtitles or you had nothing. And in my case, I would use English subtitles because mostly I was just a casual like watching anime anyways. And I really think that, you know, if you put on your target language subtitle and like try to learn how to read from them and you do a lot of volume with that, that will actually like get you bootstrapped to some degree. So I think that's one very useful method. And once you get bootstrapped, I mean, then you can start going into your own actually like reading alone. And I think in Japanese, one of the best mediums for that is visual novels. By the way, I actually hate visual novels, like content-wise generally. Like they're not my cup of tea. But they are very good in the sense that they are voiced for like half of the lines. Like for the non-narrative lines, they're like voiced with characters saying them out loud. So that is very useful. And you can also like text stroke them and like do sentence mining or whatever. And so going to the graded reading part of it, I think starting with like something easy does matter a lot and is helpful. I don't know if it needs to be a literal graded reading, like graded reader, like where you're starting with something that's like for like toddlers and like is teaching you how to say like mom and dad and bread or something. But
okay, to clarify, some graded readers are for adults. Like one of the ones that a lot of the Spanish learners start out with is Hola Lola.
Hola Lola. Oh, it's so good.
Who tries to get laid in Spain.
The author is hilarious, and he really makes the graded readers enjoyable because they're very self-deprecating. They're often based on his life, and he has a channel for beginners, but I'm digressing. But yeah, like there are some like good quality funny ones that I read it just because I liked it.
Like if there's something that high quality, that seems like a great idea to me to start with that sort of thing. But like if it's something that's not engaging for you, then I would drop that and instead just try to look for easier real material. So like there's a lot of tools for these days, like JPDB for Japanese or Natively that like try to score like each work of how difficult it is. and like just going on those and like picking something definitely on the easier half of the scale,
Yeah.
I think is very important to do, because otherwise you'll end up with some like hardcore like sci-fi fantasy like thing where half of the words like native speakers aren't that comfortable with anyways, and like
Yeah.
that's not the right place to start, right? So
Yes.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in starting with something on the easier side.
When it
I
comes to
definitely
easy native
agree.
content, I'm a big fan. So everybody's gonna say webtoons or manga, or
I am gonna say webtoons
right,
or
with your
manga.
subtitles, with matching subtitles. But I'm a big fan of chat fiction, which is mostly limited to like amateur internet work. So like, you know, like Wattpad if you're in a foreign language that's not Japanese, or maybe Shosetsu if you're you're learning Japanese. But it's essentially pure dialogue, right? It's like chat-based fiction. So like imagine
That's
reading
great.
fiction set to Discord, right? And because it's mostly dialogue, it bridges that gap between like, this is too hard to read because there's all this flowery language and descriptive stuff, versus being too boring or being like a graded, graded material, learner material.
Yeah, that seems like it's a good trade-off.
That's like as relevant as you can get. That is literally just language that you would use in day-to-day life, chatting with people on the internet. That's awesome.
So what did you guys start with? Was like Harry Potter? Anything else? Like, when you
I know
guys
that
came
Harry
to
Potter's
reading?
like the go-to. That's like, the basic starting.
I think it's a terrible idea, by the way.
I agree.
What, Harry
I think
Potter?
Harry
I
Potter
agree.
is like one of the worst choices you can make.
It's definitely, it's very, so like, as you were talking about like difficulty of books, Harry Potter is actually high on the Lexile score, relatively high, which means that it's like more complex than I think a beginner should deal with. It's very flowery, and also a lot of the language is obviously like fantasy
It's
based.
made up.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I love
agree with
fantasy.
that,
All
for
I read is
sure.
fantasy. I'm in the fantasy gang. I
And
mean,
the other issue with it is that it's translated from English. So unless you're learning English, it's translated from English, and that means, especially when the target language is Japanese,
yeah.
sometimes it's notably different than like from natively written Japanese works, because
Yeah.
the languages are so different. Like it really shows that it's translated.
I agree.
Yeah.
So when it comes to
I've heard that Harry
translated work,
Potter was really terribly translated in a lot of languages too. I've heard like
it's tough.
specifically Harry Potter's not great.
It's tough to translate. There's made up words, and then it's like,
Yeah.
how are you going to translate things that only exist in England, like in an English style school system? Like, it's just very difficult. I can totally understand why.
Yeah, it's like urban fantasy Britain translated into other. Yeah, you've got those cultural elements. I really like translated literature though. I read a
So,
lot of translations because
I've tried
I
it in
am very
Spanish,
specific.
and I've tried it in Filipino. And in Filipino,
Yeah.
I found Hunger Games really difficult. It felt like it came straight out of the
Really?
1500s. So
Wow.
modern Filipino has a lot of like English and Spanish loanwords in it. And
Yeah.
this was just like pure Tagalog, like something from 500 years ago. I found it very painful. I did not experience that reading Spanish translations from English. So I will say it's probably language dependent, depending on the translation culture, how close culturally the languages are, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think there is some benefit to reading translated works, because sometimes there's ideas or ways of speaking or turns of phrase in English that are hard to put into Japanese and actually aren't idiomatic in Japanese, but you may want to use in Japanese. And the only ways to learn those is like to go read some translated stuff, because they are tackling with that problem of like, okay, like I'm translating some technical work about physics, and in physics you talk about these things in these certain ways, and okay, then you just need to translate it somehow and then learn how it's used, right? Even if
Yeah.
it's not like idiomatic sounding Japanese or something. That's how it's discussed in Japanese. It's originally like from English, right? So like you need to, in some cases, engage with the translated works where they're like sort of authoritative for the field that they are in. But if you're just talking about like the pure like base language, I think it's good to avoid them, especially at the beginning, because like it's almost like its own little section of the language that you can learn later on, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't learn it as the first thing.
How about you, Soup? I know that you're not a super big fan of translated works. You went through the Batman podcast, right? And you were like, this definitely, you can tell it's translated.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big fan of translations in general, but Some are better than others, obviously. That said, when it's going from a language like English to Japanese or vice versa, whatever, most of the time it's going to be pretty obvious. In fact, I'm not sure if I've ran into a translation where it didn't feel like it was translated, if that makes sense. At least coming from English to Japanese. I would imagine English to Spanish or something would be a lot less noticeable, depending on what it is, but that's just my guess.
All translations are not created equal.
There's one interesting pair in the Japanese-English space, which is actually Murakami, because he's originally a Japanese author, of course, and his works are translated into English. And I think they actually translate pretty well, because his Japanese style is actually pretty English-like. Like when you read his works in Japanese, they are clearly heavily influenced.
Does he
by
do
English.
his own translations for his own books?
Nope, he doesn't. But he speaks English, and he's read a ton of English.
Right. He lives in England, right?
I think so. Yeah, he's lived abroad for quite a while. I forget where. So in his case, it translates well because the original is already pretty English influenced. So I think that's an interesting example.
Yeah, so I mean, there's definitely a lot of, I think, opinions on translations, and it's actually more of its own topic. I think you could spend all day dissecting.
I love them.
Translations. Are they good for your target language? Which ones to go for? What makes a translation good or bad?
I'm ashamed that 80% of my reading material has been translations.
That seems to be really common with Spanish speakers, though. If you ask a native Spanish speaker, what's your favorite TV show? They'll say, Los Simpsons.
Yeah.
Right? They grow up with dubs of American content, translations of American content. So
to be to be fair, what I do is I'll go on BookTube, on YouTube, and I see what the Spanish speaking booktubers are talking about and books that they really like. And if it ranks highly on their list, I figure it's probably a good translation, and then I'll read it. And most of my books have been really, really good. There is a series that I love by that's native from Spain, but I don't like all of her works. I have a very I know. I can't help it. Spain produces good content, I just follow my nose.
The Bestiario series.
El Bestiario is so good. It is so good. I'm actually re-listening to it right now. So I'm listening to El Bestiario de Axeline ahora right now. Well, not right now, but that's my current audiobook that I'm listening to.
Podcast.
Yeah, right now I'm ignoring y'all and I'm really just listening to my books, to my stories. But I'm reading right now I'm reading 2 books that are English books that are just translated. I'm reading the book 1 of The Expanse. I'm reading what is it called? What is it in English? I'm reading Half Moon City by Sarah J. Maas. But that one's actually interesting because most books in Spanish are translated by people from Spain, generally. But this series is actually translated into Mexican Spanish and has a Mexican narrator on Audible, which is a real treat.
So, as a former
me.
Spanish learner, I have to say, Mexicans are huge weebs. And there's a whole publishing company called Novelas Ligeras Mexicanas or something, right?
Ligeras, yeah.
Yeah, it's just literally Spanish original light novels. And, they mention Mexican brands. And,
yes.
If I were to, do it over again, I would do what I did. And that's just binge read these Spanish original light novels.
You would read Ella.
Yeah, it was. So the first one was good. The second one was not so good. But I'm not gonna.
Yeah, I didn't read the second one.
Yeah, I started it, and I'm I don't know. It's got sort of borderline sketchy art on the cover, and I'm I don't know. I'm not into the whole this girl who looks like she's 14 is actually a 1,000-year-old demon, right? That's not for me. But there are other series by that same author that don't have that sort of sketchy vibe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely just reading a light novel that was set in Mexico. Because that's literally what it was.
The author needs to give his characters different names. There are 5 different characters named Jose in all of his books.
That's just cultural, man.
It might be cultural, but I can't keep up.
I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know if it's cultural or not. It's imagine reading a book in English and everyone's name is Bob or something.
Do any of you guys read and listen at the same time? beyond
Yes.
obviously same language subtitles? Because I don't like to have an audiobook going and then follow along, because I often
love it.
either read too fast or too slow depending on the material, and I'm just out of sync.
I do a lot actually. So I do this. I mainly do it actually for pronunciation and pitch accent reasons, where it's like one of the best ways to like learn the pronunciation of literary words is like, listen to an audiobook while you read along with it, and you like read ahead a little bit and like try to think of what the right pronunciation is, and then you hear the right pronunciation, and like it really helps you learn pronunciation of literary words. But
That's smart.
I think it's probably more effective later on, or like, when you're already comfortable reading to some degree yourself, because otherwise, it'll be hard to focus on both at the same time. But, I could be convinced otherwise. Maybe it works early on too. I haven't tried myself, so I don't know.
Yeah, I do that for a different reason. I am #ADHD, and I have a hard time focusing. And if I find myself having a hard time getting engaged in a story, like I love reading, but sometimes it's hard to get going and into that like flow state, when you're reading a book. If I like activate my ears and my eyes, like I'm using all my sentences, I'm holding the book or the tablet, I'm reading with my eyes, and I'm listening with my ears, and I'm fully engaged. I will often start out a reading session that way if I'm having a hard time focusing that day, and then whichever one I'm like vibing with more, like if I'm vibing more with the audiobook, I'll stop reading and just listen, or vice versa. If I'm vibing with the book, I'll turn off the audiobook, which is usually what happens. I'll turn off the audiobook and I'll just read. But I find that a really good way to like get myself like engaged in the book. And it's good because I butcher sub-vocalization really bad, and it's nice to have it's nice to hear like proper pronunciation while I'm reading.
I'm also #ADHD, so that's probably why I like watching like anime with the Japanese subs, because it's like
Yes, you're
the
engaging
subs,
everything.
yeah, the subs are like an anchor for my eyes, so it like keeps me
Yes.
focused, so I don't feel the need to like go everywhere else. And
Yes.
also mining, I do something with my hands, so it's like
Yes.
it's like engaging everything, so I don't feel like wandering off and I don't know, looking at plants or something. I don't know.
No, for real. I have a big window by me, and I literally will like look at a squirrel. Like it's so stereotypical, but I am the squirrel person. I'm the squirrel ADHD person. It's embarrassing.
Okay. So I do have a question.
Delete that from the recording.
For the Japanese speaking panelists or the Japanese learning panelists here. What's up with the Japanese community being like, some of them, not all of them, are like, you have to do pure listening or pure reading. 2-channel or 3-channel reading, where you're like listening and reading, or you're listening while you're reading subtitles, is like haram. You can't do it. What's up with that? It seems unique to the Japanese community.
In my opinion, it doesn't really make that much sense. There's some truth to it in the sense that if everything you do is like dual stacked, then you'll have weaknesses in that you're relying on some part of it that won't be present like when you're in the real world. But I think, as at least like a good chunk of your immersion, it's totally fine to have both the audio and the text. And, especially, I think this comes a little bit to like, what is reading effective at? What is listening effective at helping you with? And reading really helps you a lot with passive vocab because like you see it, you can like learn it slowly. There's like no disorientation of like you weren't even able to hear it, right? So like you can see things, you can look them up. It helps a lot with your passive vocab. It doesn't really help you activate it though. So like probably heavy readers have had this experience that like all these words, but you like can't use them in combo because it's like you can't recall them fast enough, basically. And that is where, in my opinion, audio helps a lot. So like the first level of activation is like passive reading, being able to read it. Then the next one is like when you're hearing it, you're able to hear it and like connect the sounds to the like lexicon entry in your head, right? And then above that is like when you're actually speaking and like you're recalling that lexicon entry and making the sound yourself. And I think listening is a really important step there. And if all of your listening is the dual stack with the text, like you're not really like going to that second layer of like activation on those vocab items. So there needs to be some part of your immersion where you don't have subs on it, basically. Like there needs to be some place where you're just listening, but I don't think it needs to be all of it. If anything, I think it could be like 20% or something, where you're just taking all the words you've read and like are sort of activating them and then being able to hear them, which is the step towards being able to say them. Yeah, I think
will
that's
say,
where I would.
with the sort of the 2 or the 3 stack reading, I'm a big fan of the Chinese TikToks where they have like some person, just a random person doing, karaoke, and then it's sort of like each character is lit up as they sing it, and they're nice little short videos, right? They're like a minute long, and I don't know, I could just like watch them over and over and over. And I was actually, when I was still in the thick of doing Mandarin, I was acquiring a lot of Chinese characters that way. So we don't often think about karaoke as a way to acquire reading ability, but I think it's actually quite good. If you ever go to like samelanguagesubtitling.com, they do in fact actually push karaoke as an option.
There's a lot of apps now that are about learning through music too. It seems to be the cool thing to do right now, but that's a separate conversation.
I don't know. It's not like traditional Refold, right? Because like Mato is like, no, music is bad. So definitely like a little bit of a black sheep here, but I do like reading the karaoke lyrics. Well,
you're not the only one. There are at least dozens of Refolders who feel the same way. And I'm kind of in team songs too right now because they kind of create earworms in your head. Especially now that Spotify has that, like, I don't know what it's called, but it's like you click on the microphone in the app, and then the text will scroll in real time with the music, kind of like a karaoke machine. So you can hear everything that they're singing, which is pretty interesting.
I think that there is one big benefit to learning from songs, which is that it makes you use a different part of your brain. Like if you're trying to sing along with something, where you're less relying on your own model of the language and more doing like shadowing and like, just direct replication. And for this reason, I've actually heard like a lot of people who basically just learn from singing, who can't really speak that well, like, of course, because they learn from singing, but the pronunciation is actually like pretty good. All their vowels and consonants are like better than the average other learner. So like there does seem to be like a lot of benefit you can get from singing and like learning how to sing in the language. The one caveat to that is it won't teach you pitch accent because there is no pitch accent in songs. But other than that,
there's like this whole like note.
The Japanese singer guy who Matt interviewed, who got really good and was like really into singing, Nick
Kutane.
Yeah. So like, I don't know. That's one of my bones to pick with Refold. It's like, it's sort of like anti-music in a way, and I understand why. Because it's not aimed at us, right? It's aimed at people who are like just discovering immersion. And there's a lot of arguments as to why you should not be like counting, music as immersion. But I'm pro karaoke. I enjoy doing lookups with music, even if it's like a little bit more poetic or non-standard language.
I mean, it's also cultural too, like you're immersing yourself in the culture, you're getting a feel for it, you're creating like an emotional attachment with the language too, which I think is a big deal. And now that I think it's especially good if you are listening with lyrics, like you said, looking up words and really actively listening to it. But I'm one of those people that if I listen to something, I don't hear words, even in English. So I need to have the lyrics with me. It's not good immersion for me if I'm just like listening to it like in the shower or something. I need to have my computer in front of me with the lyrics scrolling. But to me, that's just kind of like reading poetry, right? And you're immersing in the culture.
YouTube account has started giving me Japanese music recommendations, mostly pop, that I quite like. So I have to say I love the YouTube recommendation engine. Guys, if you're not taking advantage of it, make your immersion account. It's fantastic once you finally train it.
Yeah.
So guys, we are at time. Thank everybody for coming in today. Darius, thank you for being a guest host. Soup, thank you for stopping by. I'm going to leave the chat up for 5 minutes. Go ahead and spam. And please go ahead and suggest a new thing for next week. Voting is going to be opening. And yeah, we'll see everybody back next week.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Listen more. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Refold Podcast. We hope you enjoyed listening and maybe even learned something new. Projects, events, and content like this podcast are only possible thanks to our generous patrons. If you liked this and want to see more similar projects, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Visit community.refold.la/Patreon-benefits to learn more.